They truly had no idea who they were dealing with when they decided to play games with you. When that narcissist assumed they could twist your thoughts, dim your light, and pull the strings of your emotions, they genuinely believed their little schemes were brilliant. They were convinced you'd stay confused, stay loyal, stay tangled up in the web they'd woven out of charm, manipulation, and empty promises. They figured you were too empathetic, too trusting, too forgiving to ever see past the mask they wore. What they never understood is that every lie they told, every time they gaslit you, every attempt to rewrite your version of reality, all of it was exposing them, not you. This is the one thing narcissists never seem to grasp. When you try to break someone who is genuinely good, someone who loves without keeping score, someone who gives without any hidden agenda, you don't just wound that person. You reveal your own emptiness. You expose the hollow space behind your own carefully constructed smile, the cracks running through your entire illusion. At first, they probably felt powerful. They thought they had you exactly where they wanted you. They believed they'd won because you doubted yourself, because you went quiet, because you kept trying to fix the very things they kept breaking. But here's the thing about manipulating someone with a genuinely good heart. You don't walk away from that untouched. You lose the exact source that once sustained your ego. You destroy the one person who ever saw the real you underneath all that posturing. You made it through their cycles. You endured the confusion they created. You walked straight through the emotional storms they threw at you. But they stayed exactly where they've always been, trapped in the same hollow patterns, hunting for the next person to drain, the next life to feed their fragile sense of self. They assumed you'd stay down. They assumed you'd never recognize your own worth. They mistook your patience for weakness and your kindness for blindness. But you were never blind, just hopeful. You were never weak, just caring. You were never really theirs to control. You were simply giving them a chance they never earned in the first place. And now they get to watch you rise. Not with bitterness, not with any desire for revenge, just with clarity, strength, and a peace they'll never know how to find for themselves. You broke free, and they stayed exactly where they've always been, hiding behind the same mask they can't seem to live without. They watch you rebuild, rise, and heal into someone they never imagined you capable of becoming because their entire vision of you was always distorted by their own ego. Narcissists genuinely cannot see beyond themselves. They only ever saw you as a resource, a supply, something to be used up and drained. But now they're finally seeing what you were all along, irreplaceable, rare, deep, and completely genuine. They didn't just lose a person, they lost the one soul capable of offering them the kind of love, loyalty, and emotional depth they will likely never encounter again. And here's what quietly tortures them now. They didn't manipulate someone ordinary. They tried to manipulate you. And that miscalculation is the very thing driving their downfall. The damage a narcissist causes doesn't simply end when the moment passes. It echoes outward and eventually rewrites their own sense of self. At first, they bury the truth. They tell themselves you were too sensitive, that you expected too much, that you completely misunderstood their intentions. They construct entire narratives just to justify their own cruelty. But those stories don't hold up forever. Reality has a way of seeping in, quietly, relentlessly, the same way it always does. It whispers to them when they're alone, when the mask slips for a moment, when the room finally goes silent, and it hits the hardest when they see you thriving, not despite them, but because you finally got away from them. What narcissists never seem to understand is that manipulation is a trade with no way to reverse it. They exchanged your authenticity for their fragile ego. They traded your loyalty for their insecurity. They swapped your trust for a fleeting sense of power, and in doing so, they cursed themselves with the very emptiness they once tried to project onto you. You've been rebuilding, slowly but steadily. They've been unraveling, quietly and inevitably. You never sought revenge. You never tried to expose them publicly. You never dropped to their level. You simply let life handle the accounting, and life has a brutal, precise way of settling old debts. Everything they poured out into the world, the gaslighting, the deception, the emotional sabotage, eventually finds its way back to them, slowly, methodically, without mercy. They end up living right in the middle of the exact chaos they created. Their collapse is rarely loud, at least not at first. Narcissistic decay tends to start privately. Relationships begin falling apart around them. People stop extending trust. The same destructive patterns keep repeating. They become strangers to their own reflection because you simply cannot build a meaningful life on a foundation made of selfishness and manipulation. Maybe they still smile in public, maybe they laugh a little louder than everyone else in the room, but there's a hollowness sitting underneath all of it now, a quiet recognition, a shadow they can't shake. They know exactly what they did. They know precisely what they lost. And there is no road that leads back to what they destroyed. That's the real curse buried inside narcissistic abuse. Once someone loses a truly loving soul, they never fully recover from it. But you weren't destroyed. You were transformed. Yes, you carry scars, but those scars are simply reminders of your strength, your clarity, your awakening. You didn't retaliate, you elevated, and that rise is exactly the punishment they never saw coming. Let them live in the world they built for themselves. Let them sit in the silence that follows the exit of the one person who once loved them with genuine sincerity. Let them feel what it's like when a narcissist finally loses someone they never actually deserved to begin with, because their manipulation was never just a simple mistake. It was a revelation of exactly who they truly are and a confirmation of exactly who you were all along. And now, as you keep growing with peace, discipline, and unshakable self-worth, they're left watching from a distance that will never close again. Narcissists always assume they can return whenever it's convenient for them, but not this time. Not with you. They had absolutely no idea that trying to control you would become the very thing that exposed them for who they really are. But now they know. When a narcissist manipulates someone genuinely good, they don't just hurt that one person, they destroy the last real, authentic connection they may ever have. They tell themselves it was just a moment, a slip-up, a tactic they can easily justify away. But emotional abuse isn't just a single isolated act. It's a fracture running straight through their own identity, and it slowly spreads inside them, quietly poisoning everything it touches. Because you simply cannot manipulate another person without betraying some part of yourself in the process. The psyche knows, the conscience knows, even buried under layers of arrogance, excuses, and fake confidence, that awareness lingers, it festers, it waits patiently for the quiet moments when the mask inevitably slips. They told themselves they were justified. They said you were overreacting, too emotional, too intense, too loving. But those are just the stories narcissists tell themselves to run from an uncomfortable truth. The truth that they violated something sacred, something they will never be able to get back. There's always a cost, and it's usually a steep one. And narcissists rarely understand that while they were busy trying to break you down, they were actually dismantling themselves piece by piece. Manipulating someone who genuinely loved them was never a victory. It was the beginning of their own psychological unraveling. Life only holds real meaning when it's rooted in honesty, humility, and accountability. Narcissists abandon every bit of that. They trade integrity for ego. They trade real connection for control. And the chaos they create eventually consumes them from the inside out. They distract themselves with noise, with people, with attention, with shallow forms of validation. But late at night, when everything finally goes quiet, reality shows up regardless. They remember your kindness, your patience, your loyalty. They remember how you showed up for them when nobody else did, how you gave them things they never truly earned, and then they remember exactly what they did in return. That kind of guilt doesn't sleep. It follows them into their new relationships. It quietly poisons their ability to genuinely connect with anyone, because deep down, they know exactly who they were with you. And they know exactly what they are without you. They know they're capable of destroying the best thing that ever happened to them. And that knowledge corrodes them slowly, quietly, and permanently. You healed, you grew, you faced every wound they left behind, and you rose above it. But narcissists remain prisoners of the very behavior they refuse to acknowledge. Their conscience won't fully release them. Their patterns won't let them grow. Their ego won't allow them to evolve. Something honest, something real, something genuinely human died inside them the day they tried to dominate you, and no amount of outside validation can bring back what their own ego killed. That's the lasting cost of narcissistic abuse. It's never just about what they did to you. It's also about what they did to themselves. They fractured their own character. They undermined their own sense of identity. They taught themselves that hurting someone kind was somehow acceptable. And once you cross that line, you lose the ability to build anything truly meaningful. The deeper suffering ultimately belongs to them. They know exactly what they threw away. They know they chose selfishness over connection. They know they lost someone who genuinely cared. And no matter how they spin the story, no matter who they try to blame, that quiet inner voice never fully stops whispering, "You did this, you lost them, and you will never get them back." So yes, you were hurt, you were wounded deeply, but you healed with dignity intact. You rose with clarity. They, on the other hand, are left standing in the wreckage of their own choices. They assumed your kindness meant weakness. They assumed your empathy meant submission. They assumed your patience meant dependence. They misread every single thing about you. They assumed your silence meant you were powerless, that your patience meant you were incapable of standing up, that you were too naive to ever see through their manipulation. But what they never fully understood, and honestly may still not understand, is that you were never weak. You were strong in ways their ego simply couldn't comprehend. Real strength doesn't always roar. It doesn't need to explode into anger or lash out seeking revenge. The kind of strength forged through self-respect, discipline, and clarity often looks calm, composed, and completely unshakable. And that is exactly what you had. A strength that didn't panic, that didn't waste breath on someone who was never going to truly listen anyway. They assumed you were easy to manipulate simply because you didn't react to every insult, didn't fight every slight, didn't beg to be recognized. You gave them space, not because you were oblivious to the warning signs, but because you genuinely hoped they might show real character, that they might prove capable of some kind of honor. That restraint, that grace, is exactly what made you dangerous in the quietest, most dignified way possible. Your silence was never permission. Your patience was never surrender. You were watching, listening, quietly taking note, letting their true nature reveal itself in its own time. And it did, over and over. Yet you remained kind, not blind, not naive, not weak, but simply unwilling to let their toxicity harden who you are. That takes genuine power. Not the power to destroy someone, but the power to remain whole, centered, and unshaken, even in the presence of someone trained in manipulation. And when you finally walked away, when your silence turned into real distance, they had no idea how to respond. People who thrive on control and emotional exploitation panic the moment their target finally detaches. They're used to extracting drama, feeding off reaction chows, and you gave them none of it. You gave them space instead, and inside that space, you let life do the heavy lifting. The weight of their own choices became theirs alone to carry, far heavier than any argument or confrontation could ever have been. They underestimated the damage your silence would cause. Not the silence of indifference, but the silence of someone who has seen the truth clearly, accepted it fully, and chosen to protect themselves. That kind of silence is decisive. It's calm, controlled, and final. It's the storm finally settling inside you, the realization that dignity and self-respect matter far more than proving any point ever could. Anyone can shout when they're hurting. Anyone can lash out in anger, but it takes an entirely different level of strength to feel all of it. The betrayal, the manipulation, the gaslighting, and still choose not to become bitter. That was your choice. To rise instead of rage, to become better instead of broken. They thought they'd defeated you. They thought your quiet meant emptiness, that your patience meant fear, that your grace meant weakness. But in that very silence, you were quietly rebuilding, reflecting, processing, growing in ways they simply couldn't see and could never fully understand. Beneath that calm exterior, beneath the composure, there was a resolve they never had the tools to measure. You weren't stuck. You weren't powerless. You were preparing. You were letting their chaos reveal itself fully while you quietly grew beyond anything they could control. And now they see it clearly. They see you thriving, smiling without needing their approval, living fully without their presence, and it unsettles them deeply. The version of you they believed they could still manipulate simply doesn't exist anymore. You've outgrown the cage they built around you. You've stopped justifying your worth to people who could never truly see it. You've stopped waiting for them to recognize something they were never capable of recognizing, and now they're left to face the consequences, not because you set out to punish them, but because life took care of that on its own. Life has a way of exposing narcissists eventually. Life always finds a way to balance what they assumed they could take for granted. And now they feel the ache of everything they threw away, the slow realization that the person they tried to control, discard, and use up was, in truth, the strongest, rarest presence they ever had in their life. They thought you were fragile, but you turned out to be unbreakable. They thought you were replaceable, but now they understand they lost someone truly irreplaceable, and you never raised your voice, you never chased after them. Your silence, your distance, your grace, all of it spoke far louder than any confrontation ever could have. You never wasted your strength on the wrong person, and now finally they see the truth clearly. They can't undo what they lost. They can't reclaim what they destroyed, and they will likely never again encounter the depth, loyalty, and integrity you brought into their life. You were never interested in playing their games. You showed up with an open heart. You offered honesty even when it was inconvenient. You offered patience even when it wasn't deserved. You gave them your best self, and they took it completely for granted. But this isn't just an ordinary loss for them. This runs much deeper than that. Because when a narcissist meets someone who witnesses them at their absolute worst and still chooses to stay, someone who offers unconditional loyalty, and they discard that person anyway, the weight of that decision doesn't just fade away. It lingers. It attaches itself to their identity. It becomes a shadow they can't outrun, a quiet voice that surfaces in moments of loneliness and stillness, whispering that they let the best thing go. At the time, they probably convinced themselves they were choosing something better, something easier, something more exciting or convenient. But now, nothing else measures up. Every new connection feels shallow by comparison. Every new person feels fragile. Every distraction, every fresh start, every attempt to recreate what they once had with you falls flat because once someone has experienced genuine authenticity, everything artificial starts to feel painfully empty. They search for traces of your qualities in other people. They chase echoes of the person they lost. Maybe they pretend they've moved on entirely, but underneath it all, the comparison never really goes away. A quiet, persistent realization that nothing and no one can replace what they destroyed. They lost someone rare, someone real. You didn't just offer them love, you offered depth, understanding, and stability. You held space for their chaos. You carried their pain without judgment. You believed in them even when they couldn't believe in themselves. And they treated all of that like it was disposable. That's the cruelty at the core of narcissism. They can't recognize the value of genuine care until it's already gone. Now they're haunted, not just by what they did, but by everything they'll never get to experience again. And the real tragedy is that they didn't see any of it clearly until it was already far too late. That's the true price of crossing someone with real integrity. The cost doesn't show up right away. It shows up years down the line, in the quiet, in the emptiness, in the slow, gnawing realization that they burned down a bridge to something irreplaceable. They remember your laugh. They remember your words. They remember the comfort of knowing someone genuinely had their back, no matter what. And now they sit in silence, fully aware that they destroyed the very thing they claim to value most. Loyalty, like yours, never came with conditions attached, and that's exactly what made it so powerful, though they couldn't see it clearly at the time. Their ego, their immaturity, their short-sightedness blinded them to it completely. And now they're paying for that every single day, through every failed connection, every hollow distraction, every desperate attempt to chase validation from somewhere else. You never had to punish them. Life handled that on its own. Life has a brutal way of teaching lessons that narcissists refuse to learn until it's simply too late to matter. The moment they betrayed you, they cut themselves off from the one person who saw the best in them, even during their absolute worst moments. No apology, no excuse, no rewriting of history will ever change that fact. You, meanwhile, carried the pain, but you also carried your integrity right alongside it. You walked away, not seeking vengeance, but holding on to your dignity. And that is something they will never truly forget, not because they miss what they had exactly, but because they finally understand what they'll never get back. The connection, the safety, the honesty, the unwavering loyalty, that kind of bond doesn't just grow anywhere, it's rare. And they threw it away without realizing what it was worth. Now all that's left for them is a void. They're the ones left searching for echoes of you and people who will never quite measure up. They're chasing ghosts, hoping to feel even a fraction of what you once freely offered them. And all they ever find is absence. They let go of something sacred. They destroyed something genuinely beautiful. And in doing so, they sentenced themselves to a life where your absence speaks louder than anything they try to fill it with. They lost you, and that loss is something they'll carry for the rest of their life. You, on the other hand, could have easily crumbled. No one would have blamed you if you had, but you didn't. You healed, you rose, you thrived. And that is the one truth they will never be able to escape. They thought they could control you, manipulate you, silence your power. But they were wrong. True strength was never about volume. It's the grace to endure, the courage to walk away, and the wisdom to protect your own heart. You weren't broken by their games. You were refined by them. You didn't retaliate. You rose instead. Every step forward you take, every success you build, every moment of peace you find reflects exactly what they lost and can never reclaim. They live with absence and emptiness, while you live with freedom, clarity, and dignity. You survived, you healed, and now you thrive.